The guard notices the shoe first. A small patent shoe pressed against the car door, toe turned inward. Princess Charlotte isn't meant to ride without a footrest. She's crying but silently, shoulders locked, hands clenched in her lap. Camilla's hand remains on the door handle, impatient. Protocol says open the gate. Instinct says stop everything. The guard doesn't move. The tires chirped once, a short protest on stone, then stopped. The guard's gloved palm was flat against the bonnet before he fully registered the movement. Heat from the engine bled through the wool and leather. The car idled, low and steady, a controlled animal waiting for permission to move again. He didn't step back. He didn't look at the driver. His attention stayed fixed on the rear door. Inside, the child's head was turned away from the window. Not slumped, held, shoulders drawn in as if bracing against something unseen. The crying hadn't been loud enough to carry beyond the glass, but he'd seen it in the reflection first. The slight distortion on the window where moisture gathered and vanished again. This wasn't right. The gate was open, clearance confirmed. Time slot approved down to the second. Everything was clean, too clean. The only irregularity was the shoe, one foot not resting where it should be. A small detail, but the sort his training had been built around noticing. Move your hand. The voice came from behind him, close enough that he could hear the irritation in the breath, controlled but present. He didn't turn. He kept his eyes level with the handle of the rear door, where another hand rested, older, steady, impatient. "Sir," the driver said, not raising his voice, "we have instruction." The guard shifted his weight just enough to lock his stance. He was aware of how this would look on camera, a body out of place, a line broken, a disruption where none was scheduled. He could already imagine the report language: unnecessary obstruction, misjudgment under pressure. Inside the car, the child's hands came into view. They were clenched tight in her lap, knuckles pale, thumbs tucked under fingers as if she'd been taught not to fidget. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was looking down. "Open the door," the woman said. The guard finally turned his head, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the command. Her hand stayed on the handle. She hadn't looked inside. She didn't need to. Authority had never required confirmation. "There's a delay," he said. It wasn't an answer. It was a pause shaped like one. Her eyes flicked to his chest, to the insignia, then back to his face. The calculation was quick. This was not a man prone to panic. That made him inconvenient. "A delay for what?" she asked. He didn't reply. He lifted his hand from the bonnet and raised it slightly, palm outward. The signal was small, easily missed, but the driver saw it. The engine cut. Silence dropped heavier than sound. From inside the car came a sharp, involuntary inhale. The child's shoulders rose, then froze. The guard stepped closer to the door, angling his body so that, if it opened, he would be between the child and everyone else. His heart rate stayed even. That, more than anything, told him he was already past the point of reversal. "You are overstepping," the woman said quietly. He met her eyes fully now. "I need a visual." "This is not your decision." It is if she's distressed. A beat, then another. Around them the courtyard felt suddenly exposed. Too open, too many sightlines, too many people trained not to react unless instructed. The woman's fingers tightened on the handle. The guard saw the child's head turn, just slightly, as if responding to pressure rather than sound. If the door opened now, he would have seconds. If it didn't, he would have none. He shifted his foot forward, blocking the arc of the door. Behind him, a radio clicked to life. The radio clicked again, louder this time, as if whoever held it had leaned closer. "Hold position," a voice said, neutral, unhurried, not a question. The guard didn't acknowledge it. His focus stayed on the space between the woman's hand and the door handle, less than an inch now, enough to matter. "Step aside," she said, still quiet. The volume never rose, That was the point. She was used to rooms obeying before sound was required. He felt the eyes then, other guards, aides at the edge of the courtyard, a security officer near the gate pretending to study his tablet. No one moved. No one intervened. The system waited to see who would blink first. The child shifted again. Not a sob, not a sound, just movement. Her knee bumped the door panel, soft but deliberate, as if testing whether it was solid. The guard saw her mouth open, then close. Whatever she'd almost said stayed inside. That did it. Door stays closed, he said. The woman finally looked inside. It was brief, a glance, nothing more. But the guard caught the change in her posture, a recalibration, subtle but unmistakable. Able, she straightened, withdrew her hand a fraction, then placed it back, slower this time. "You are creating a scene," she said. "There already is one," he replied. A third voice cut in, closer now. "What's the issue?" "Senior security." The cadence gave him away. Someone who spoke in summaries and expected them to become reality. The guard didn't turn. Child distress, unverified condition. Silence stretched, the kind that follows when the wrong words are said in the right place. "She's tired," the woman said. "That's all." The guard angled his head slightly, enough to see the reflection in the glass. The child's eyes were open now, wide, fixed on his shoulder, not his face, as if afraid to be seen looking. "Tired children don't brace like that," he said. The senior officer stepped closer. The guard could hear his shoes on stone, measured, careful not to escalate by accident. "Do you have cause?" the officer asked. The guard exhaled through his nose. "I have indicators." "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it is." Another pause, this one heavier. The officer knew the rules as well as he did. Indicators were enough to report, rarely enough to act, almost never enough to stop a movement already approved. "Open the door," the woman said again, this time to the officer. He didn't respond immediately. His gaze moved from her to the guard, then to the car. He leaned slightly, peering through the glass. The child's hands were shaking now, not violently, just enough to be noticeable if you were trained to notice small things. The officer straightened. "We'll do a welfare check," he said. The woman's head snapped toward him. "That's unnecessary." "Not if it's logged," he replied. Calm, bureaucratic, a shield disguised as procedure. The guard felt a tightness in his chest ease, just a fraction. Not relief, permission. The officer nodded once, opened the door. The woman hesitated. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. A moment where authority weighed consequence. Then her hand pulled. The door opened slowly, too slowly. The guard stepped forward immediately, placing himself in the gap, one arm braced against the frame. He didn't look at the woman. He knelt, lowering himself to the child's level without touching her. "It's all right," he said quietly. Not reassurance, just acknowledgement. The child's breath hitched. Her eyes flicked past him to the woman, to the watching figures beyond, and then back to him. She shook her head once, a small, tight movement. The officer leaned in. "Princess." She didn't answer. The guard felt the weight of the moment settle fully now. Cameras, reports, consequences stacking invisibly. The child lifted one hand from her lap and pointed, not at the guard, not at the officer, but back into the car, toward the far door. The one that led away from the palace. The woman stepped forward. "Enough," she said. The guard didn't move. The word enough didn't echo. It landed flat, absorbed by the stone and protocol around them. The guard stayed where he was, one knee on the ground, one arm still braced against the open door. He hadn't touched the child. He knew better than that. Touch invited interpretation. Behind him, the woman's presence pressed closer. Not physical force, authority. The kind that usually didn't need to raise its voice because systems rose for it. "Step away," she said. "You've confirmed she's fine." The guard didn't answer. He watched the child's breathing instead, short, controlled, not crying now. That was worse. Children cried when they expected someone to respond. Silence meant calculation. The senior officer cleared his throat, a subtle signal. This has gone far enough. Princess, the officer said again, softer, are you hurt? The child shook her head, once, precise. The guard noted it, a response trained into her. Yes and no had been taught early, everything else was optional. Then we close this, the woman said immediately. We're behind schedule. The guard shifted his weight, still kneeling, so the open door remained blocked by his body. It was a quiet maneuver, no sudden movement, no defiance that could be described as aggression, just geometry. She hasn't answered the other question, he said. No one had asked it out loud. That was intentional. The officer's jaw tightened. Which question is that? The guard didn't look away from the child. Whether she wants to go. A murmur rippled at the edge of the courtyard. Not voices, shifts, shoes adjusting, radios being palmed but not lifted. That is not appropriate, the woman said sharply. It's necessary. She is a child. Yes, he replied, that's why. The child's fingers curled into the seat fabric. She glanced at the woman now just for a second, then back to the guard. Her lips parted, closed, parted again. Nothing came out. The officer straightened, clearly uncomfortable. We can't hold transport based on. She pointed, the guard interrupted calm. She indicated direction away from here. Hat could mean anything. It usually doesn't. The woman stepped closer, her shadow falling across the open door. You're projecting, she said, and you're obstructing royal movement. The guard finally looked up at her, not challengingly, professionally. I'm refusing to close the door. The word refusing hung there. It was cleaner than arguing, more dangerous. The officer inhaled slowly. On what grounds? Welfare uncertainty, the guard said, and conflicting authority signals. The woman laughed once, short and incredulous. Conflicting authority, you think I am the problem? I think the situation is, he said. The child's foot shifted again, the lone shoe scraping softly against the floor mat. The sound was barely audible, but the guard felt it like a tap on the spine. The officer rubbed his temple. He was calculating now not safety but fallout. Who would sign what? How this would read later. We can relocate her to the anteroom, he said finally. Brief check, 5 minutes. No, the woman said immediately. The guard didn't react. He'd expected that. Why not? The officer asked. She's already been settled, the woman replied. Moving her again is unnecessary stress. The guard watched the child flinch at the word settled. That decides it, he said. The woman turned on him. You do not decide anything. I decide whether I step aside, he replied, and I'm not. Silence spread again, thicker this time. The gate stood open. The car sat vulnerable. The palace behind them felt suddenly too close, as if listening. The officer's radio vibrated at his hip. He looked down at it, then back at the guard. Stand by, he said quietly. The guard stayed kneeling. The child did not look away. The officer turned his body slightly away as he answered the radio, shielding his mouth out of habit rather than secrecy. The exchange was brief, controlled, the kind of communication that carried weight not because of what was said, but because of who was listening. When he turned back, the woman was watching him closely. Her composure hadn't cracked, but the stillness around her had sharpened. She understood delays. She did not tolerate them. We are holding, the officer said. For how long? She asked. Until clarity, he replied. The guard remained in place. His knee had begun to ache against the stone, but he welcomed it. Pain anchored him, kept him from drifting into hypotheticals. The child shifted again. This time she leaned forward slightly, her forehead almost touching the glass of the opposite door. She was listening now, not to voices, but to absence, to the delay that had formed around her like a pocket of quiet. The woman exhaled through her nose. "This is unnecessary." The guard spoke without raising his voice. "Then it will resolve quickly." She turned on him. "You've made your point." "I haven't," he said. "She has." The officer stepped closer to the open door, careful not to crowd the child. "Princess," he said, "we're going to move you somewhere quieter, just for a moment." The child didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the guard again. Her eyes flicked briefly to his shoulder radio, then back to his face. A question unspoken. He nodded once, not permission, confirmation. She slid forward on the seat, slow and deliberate. Her movements were precise, controlled in the way children learned when unpredictability was punished. As she swung her legs down, the lone shoe finally slipped off and landed on the stone with a soft, hollow sound. No one moved to pick it up. The woman's jaw tightened. "This is becoming inappropriate." The officer ignored her. He extended a hand not to the child but toward the guard, a silent request. The guard rose smoothly and stepped back just enough to clear space, positioning himself between the woman and the child as she slid down from the car. He did not touch her. He adjusted his stance so that, if she stumbled, she would fall toward him rather than away. She didn't stumble. She stood barefoot on the cold stone, shoulders drawn tight, eyes fixed on the ground. The woman took a step forward. "Charlotte." The child flinched. It was small but unmistakable. That was the moment the officer made his decision. "We're relocating," he said louder now, not shouting, declaring. "Anteroom 2. "That is not authorized," the woman snapped. "It is now," he replied. "Logged under welfare protocol." The word logged landed hard. The guard saw it in the woman's eyes, the realization that this moment had crossed from private correction into recorded fact. 2 additional guards moved in, not rushing, not dramatic. Formation shifted. Subtle barriers formed. Lines were drawn. The child hesitated, then took one small step toward the guard. He matched her pace, half a step behind, never leading, never following too closely. The anteroom door was only 20 meters away, but the distance felt longer, stretched thin by watching eyes. As they reached the threshold, the woman spoke again, her voice lipped. "This will be addressed." The guard didn't respond. He knew that already. Inside, the anteroom was cool and dim, lit by a single overhead panel. The door closed softly behind them, cutting off the courtyard's exposure. The officer exhaled for the first time. "Stay with her," he said to the guard. "I'll handle the rest." The guard nodded. The child sat on the bench, feet dangling, shoulders still tight. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Outside the door, voices began to rise, still controlled but sharper now. The sound of power rearranging itself. The guard stood between the child and the door, hands clasped behind his back. He knew the refusal had only just begun. The anteroom door clicked shut, with a sound too soft to signal safety. The guard remained standing for a full 3 seconds after it closed, listening. The corridor outside carried voices now, measured, clipped, layered with restraint. He could identify who was speaking by cadence alone. Authority rarely shouted. It compressed. The child sat on the bench beneath the wall light. The glow flattened her features, drained color from her face. Her feet didn't reach the floor. One heel tapped the wood once, then stopped, as if she'd caught herself breaking a rule. The guard shifted position so his reflection appeared in the glass panel of the door, not directly in front of her, just enough that if she looked up, she'd see him without having to turn. She didn't look up. Her hands were folded now, fingers interlaced too tightly. The knuckles were pale, not shaking, controlled. He noted the absence of tears on her cheeks. The crying had stopped the moment the door closed. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "Take your time," he said quietly. He hadn't asked a question, he wouldn't. Questions created expectations. Silence gave space. Outside, a voice rose slightly, frustration, not anger. Another voice answered, lower, firmer. The balance of power was still shifting. He could feel it through the door. The child finally lifted her head. Her eyes went first to the glass, to the reflection. She watched him without looking directly at him, studying the shape of his shoulders, the way he stood, assessing. He stayed still. When she spoke, it was barely above breath. Am I in trouble? The guard's jaw tightened. He kept his voice level. No. She considered that. Her gaze dropped to her hands again. She said I was being difficult. He chose his words carefully. You were noticed. That made her look up properly this time, straight at him. Her eyes were dry, wide, too alert. I didn't mean to, she said quickly. I tried not to. The sentence stopped short. He didn't prompt her to finish it. He stepped half a pace to the side, angling his body so the door was no longer directly behind him. Less imposing, less like a barrier. What happened in the car? He asked. She swallowed. Her shoulders rose, then fell. I wasn't supposed to cry. He waited. She told me to stop, the child continued. I couldn't, so I did. The logic was childlike and precise. He felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Stopping the sound was not the same as stopping the feeling. Someone had taught her that distinction early. Outside the door, footsteps approached, then stopped. A shadow passed the glass, paused, then moved on, listening without entering. Did anyone hurt you? He asked. She shook her head immediately. Too fast, too rehearsed. He didn't contradict her. Did anyone scare you? This time the pause lasted longer. Her fingers tightened. I don't like when doors lock, she said finally. The guard's eyes flicked to the handle of the anteroom door, then back to her. Did it lock? She nodded once. Who locked it? Another pause, longer still. She said it was safer, the child said, because I was upset. The words were delivered flat, as if repeated, as if practiced. Outside, a radio chirped. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. The child flinched, shoulders jumping despite herself. The guard stepped closer, not toward her but toward the door. He placed his hand lightly against the glass, not blocking, grounding. No one will lock you in here, he said. She searched his face. Promise. I won't allow it, he replied. That answer seemed to satisfy her more than a promise would have. From the corridor came a new sound. A door opening elsewhere, brisk footsteps, a voice he hadn't heard yet. Higher authority. The kind that arrived when situations stopped being containable. The guard straightened slightly. He felt the pressure returning, reorganizing. The child followed his gaze to the door. Is she coming? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Outside, a hand touched the handle. The handle turned partway, then stopped. A voice spoke through the door, not raised, not hurried, status. The senior officer answered from the corridor, just out of sight. Welfare check in progress. A pause, the kind that came when someone decided whether to assert or observe. TA. Guard stayed where he was, one hand still resting against the glass. He didn't look back at the child. He knew she was watching him anyway. We need access, the voice said. Negative, the officer replied. Not yet. Another pause, longer this time. Inside the anteroom, the air felt thinner. The child's breathing quickened, though she tried to keep it shallow. The guard shifted his stance subtly, placing himself more squarely between her and the door. No one's coming in, he said quietly without turning. Not unless I move. She nodded, small and sharp. The handle moved again. This time the latch disengaged fully. The door opened a fraction, stopped by the guard's shoulder. He hadn't braced for impact. He hadn't needed to. The message was clear. Step aside, the voice said, closer now. He turned his head just enough to see the man outside. Not palace staff. Security command, crisp suit, eyes that measured consequence before emotion. Child requested space, the guard said. We're providing it. That's not your call. It is if she's distressed. The man's gaze flicked past him, searching for the child. The guard adjusted his position by inches, blocking the line of sight without appearing to. Inside, the child's feet scraped softly against the bench as she drew them up. The man exhaled a controlled release. You're escalating. Yes, the guard replied. The word landed heavier than anything else he could have said. The officer stepped into view beside the man. We're documenting, he said, everything. That did it. The man's posture shifted, not aggressive but restrained. He knew the implications now. Documentation changed trajectories, quietly, permanently. 5 minutes, he said, then we reassess. The guard nodded once. He didn't thank him. The door closed again, firmer this time. The latch clicked, not locked. The guard tested it gently. It gave. Behind him, the child let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She's angry, the child said. The guard turned back toward her. She's frustrated. Because of me. Because control was interrupted, he said. That's not your responsibility. The child considered that. She doesn't like when plans change. No, he agreed, some people don't. Outside, voices resumed, lower now but more numerous. The sound of phones, radios, the machinery of consequence beginning to turn. The guard crouched slightly, lowering himself again, not kneeling, not towering. Did this happen before? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. In the car? He asked. She nodded again. Locked? Yes. His jaw set, he kept his voice even. Anyone else know? She shrugged, a small, helpless motion. I didn't tell. Why not? She looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. I didn't know I could. The guard felt something tighten sharply in his chest. He stood slowly. Outside the door, footsteps approached again, multiple this time, faster, purposeful. The situation was no longer contained. He reached up and touched his radio. Not to call for help. To make a record. The guard's thumb hovered over the transmit key for half a second longer than regulation allowed. That hesitation mattered. It separated reflex from intent. He keyed the channel. Control, he said evenly, initiating welfare record, timestamp 1442. The radio answered with a short tone, recording active, no commentary, no acknowledgement beyond the fact that what followed would exist. Inside the anteroom, the child watched him closely. She didn't ask what he was doing. She'd already learned that questions weren't always safe. Outside, the corridor noise shifted. Someone had heard the tone. That sound carried meaning in places like this. It meant process. It meant traceability. The door opened again without knocking. The woman entered first. She didn't rush. She didn't scan the room. Her eyes went directly to the guard's radio, then to his face. A professional assessment. Containment mode. Behind her stood the man in the suit and the senior officer. The doorway filled. Authority stacked deliberately. This is inappropriate, the woman said calmly. End the recording. The guard did lower his hand. Negative. Her gaze flicked to the child for the first time since entering. The look was brief, unreadable, then gone. You're overreaching, she said. He nodded once, documenting. The man in the suit stepped forward. You're invoking protocol beyond your remit. Yes, the guard replied, because standard channels failed. That drew a reaction, a tightening around the woman's eyes. Failure was not a word she accepted lightly. The senior officer cleared his throat. We should proceed carefully. We should proceed correctly, she corrected. The guard felt the shift immediately. The atmosphere hardened. This was no longer about the child's immediate state. This was about authority regaining narrative control. Charlotte, the woman said, turning slightly toward the bench, her eyes softened by degrees. Come here. The child did not move. The guard did not intervene. Not yet, he watched. This was a boundary test. I said, come here, the woman repeated, still calm. The child's fingers tightened on the edge of the bench. She looked at the guard, then back down. She's been advised to remain seated, the guard said. The woman turned on him. You do not advise her. I do when safety is unclear. The man in the suit raised a hand slightly. Let's not escalate. The woman ignored him. This is becoming performative, she said to the guard. You're creating a narrative where none exists. The guard met her gaze steadily. Narratives require intention. Records require facts. Her mouth tightened. End the recording. No. Silence fell, heavy and deliberate. She stepped closer to the guard now, lowering her voice. Do you understand what you're doing to yourself? Yes. And you're prepared for that. He didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the child instead. She was watching them now, eyes darting between faces, tracking tone rather than words. I am, he said. The woman straightened. Then we'll proceed under corrective protocol. The man in the suit looked sharply at her. That's premature. She didn't look at him. It's necessary. The guard felt the pressure tighten. Corrective protocol meant reframing the situation. It meant authority asserting that the irregularity lay not in the event, but in his response to it. You're being relieved, she said. The words were delivered evenly, surgically. The guard didn't move. By whom? He asked. She gestured slightly toward the door. Command will assign. No, he interrupted calm. Who is relieving me right now? Another pause, this one dangerous. No one stepped forward. The child slid her feet off the bench and stood, quiet, small, barefoot. Every adult in the room noticed at once. The woman turned toward her. Charlotte, we're leaving. The guard took one step, not toward the woman but closer to the child. Not yet, he said. The woman's eyes hardened. You're obstructing again. Yes, he replied, and it's recorded. Outside the room, someone began speaking urgently into a radio. The system was no longer unified. And that was when protocol became a weapon. The woman adjusted her stance, aligning herself squarely with the doorway. It was a subtle maneuver, but the guard recognized it immediately. Control of exits, control of flow. Recording or not, she said, this ends now. She extended her hand toward the child again, palm open, gesture softened for effect. Come here. The child hesitated. Her gaze flicked to the guard, a silent request for confirmation. He didn't shake his head. He didn't nod. He simply didn't move. That was enough. I want to stay, the child said. The words were quiet, nearly swallowed by the room, but they landed with force. The man in the suit inhaled sharply. The senior officer's eyes closed for a fraction of a second. The woman's hand froze in midair. That's not appropriate, she said immediately, the softness vanishing. You're confused. The guard spoke before the child could respond. Statement logged, he said, glancing briefly at his radio. Child expresses preference to remain. You're coaching her, the woman snapped. I haven't touched her, he replied. I haven't prompted her. The man in the suit stepped forward now, inserting himself physically between the woman and the guard. We need to slow this down. She rounded on him. This is a delay tactic. This is risk management, he countered, and you know it. The guard felt the balance shift again, not in his favor but away from her unilateral control. It was subtle, but it mattered. The woman turned back to the child, voice clipped. Charlotte, you're tired. You don't understand what's happening. The child's shoulders squared. It was a small motion but deliberate. I do, she said. The room went very still. The guard felt a chill move through him, not fear, but recognition. This was the moment that would be replayed in rooms he would never enter. The woman's jaw tightened. This conversation is over. She reached for the child's wrist. The guard moved. He didn't grab. He stepped into the space, intercepting with his forearm, stopping the reach without force. The contact was brief, controlled, undeniable. "That's enough," the man in the suit said sharply. The senior officer raised his radio. "Command, we have physical boundary breach." The woman stepped back, eyes blazing now. "He touched me." The guard didn't deny it. "I blocked access to the child." "You laid hands on." "On air," he said evenly. "Check the recording." Silence, then the man in the suit nodded slowly. "We will." The woman laughed once cold. "You think this protects you?" "I think it protects her," the guard replied. The child had gone very still. Her eyes were fixed on the guard's sleeve where his arm had intercepted. She hadn't flinched. That mattered. The man in the S. Hewitt turned to the senior officer. "We're invoking separation." The officer nodded, understood. Two guards appeared at the doorway, not to restrain but to stand. Presence without touch. The woman's authority hadn't vanished. It had fractured. "You're making a mistake," she said to the guard, lowering her voice. "This will follow you." "Yes," he agreed. She turned on her heel and left the room. The door closed behind her with a decisive click. The guard exhaled slowly, carefully. The recording tone still pulsed in his ear. The man in the suit looked at him. "You've escalated this beyond containment." The guard met his gaze. It was already there. The man studied him for a long moment. "Stay here," he said. "Do not leave the child." The guard nodded. The child finally looked up at him again. "Am I allowed to sit?" "Yes," he said. "You're allowed." She sat. Outside the anteroom, raised voices moved farther down the corridor. Doors opened, closed, the palace adjusting around a fault line. The guard stood watch. He knew now that protocol would not protect him. But it had exposed something far more dangerous. The recording tone ended with a soft click. The absence of it felt louder than the corridor outside. The guard lowered his hand from the radio but did not relax his posture. He stood where he had been ordered to stand, between the child and the door, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders square, expression neutral. Stillness now was a decision. The child sat on the bench again, feet tucked beneath her this time. She had pulled her dress down carefully over her knees, a small act of order after disruption. Her breathing had steadied, but her eyes kept drifting toward the door, tracking every shift of sound beyond it. Outside, voices moved away, then returned, authority reorganizing. No shouting, no panic. That meant the matter had reached a level where emotion became a liability. The guard felt it before he heard it, pressure building, not dissipating. A different radio tone cut through the corridor. Not his, command-level traffic, the kind that bypassed intermediaries. Footsteps approached, one set this time, deliberate, unhurried. The door opened. The senior officer entered alone. His jacket was off now, sleeves rolled neatly to the forearm. A signal. Formality was being reduced. Control was not. "Recording has been secured," he said quietly. "You understand what that means?" "Yes," the guard replied. "It will be reviewed." "Yes." The officer glanced at the child, then deliberately looked away. "You've created a situation where discretion is no longer possible." "I'm aware." The officer studied him for a moment longer. "You could have stopped earlier." The guard didn't answer. That wasn't a question. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken consequence. "There is another channel," the officer said at last. "One we don't use lightly." The guard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knew which one. Everyone did. It existed precisely so most people would never invoke it. That channel bypasses internal resolution, the officer continued. Once activated, it can't be walked back. Yes. It will trigger external oversight. Yes. The officer exhaled slowly. It will be interpreted as a failure of trust. The guard finally shifted his gaze from the door to the officer. It already is. The officer nodded once, no argument. The child looked up then, sensing the change in tone. Am I going home? She asked. The guard turned toward her. Not yet. Her shoulders tensed. Did I do something wrong? No, he said immediately. You did something right. She considered that, brow furrowing slightly. It didn't feel right. Important things often don't, he replied. The officer watched the exchange carefully. Then he looked back at the guard. If you make this call, you will lose control of what happens next. The guard felt the weight of that statement settle fully. Careers, reputations, silence enforced by contract and consequence. He thought of the car door, the locked space, the practice quiet. I already have, he said. The officer studied him for another long moment, then stepped aside, clearing the space near the wall panel. He didn't say do it. He didn't have to. The guard moved toward the panel. Each step felt measured, deliberate. There was no rush now. Rushing would imply doubt. He keyed the access code from memory. The panel chimed softly. A secondary prompt appeared, confirmation required. Behind him, the child watched, eyes wide but steady. What are you doing? She asked. He didn't look back, making sure someone listens. The officer's voice dropped. Once you confirm, this becomes bigger than all of us. The guard placed his thumb over the final input. Outside the anteroom, a door slammed somewhere down the corridor. Voices rose briefly, then fell again. Time compressed. He pressed the key. The panel flashed once, then went dark. Somewhere far above them, a call was being routed that W. As never meant to be made casually. The guard stepped back into position between the child and the door. He didn't know who would answer. Only that they would have to. The response didn't come immediately. That more than anything told the guard how serious the channel was. Ordinary calls rang. This one waited. The panel remained dark. No indicator lights. No confirmation beyond the absence of rejection. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, the request was moving through layers designed to slow it down. The senior officer checked his watch, then deliberately turned it face down on the table beneath the wall light. Timekeeping had become irrelevant. What mattered now was sequence. The child shifted on the bench. Is someone angry? She asked. The guard glanced back at her. Someone is being informed. She nodded slowly, as if that distinction mattered to her. It probably did. Footsteps approached again, faster this time, more than one set. The corridor outside filled with motion that did not try to disguise itself. Doors opened, closed. A voice gave clipped instructions. The door to the anteroom opened without warning. 2 uniformed security personnel stood outside, flanking the man in the suit. He looked different now. Less composed, not panicked, alert. Status, he said. The senior officer didn't hesitate. External oversight channel activated. The man's eyes snapped to the wall panel, then back to the guard. You did that? Yes. A brief, incredulous smile crossed the man's face, then vanished. Do you understand the scope of what you've triggered? Yes. And you still chose to proceed? Yes. The man exhaled sharply. You've just implied institutional failure. I've recorded it, the guard replied. I haven't implied anything. The man looked past him to the child, then quickly away. This becomes political now. It already was, the guard said. Silence followed, heavy, calculating. Another radio chirped in the corridor, this one different, higher priority. The senior officer's device vibrated in his hand. He answered without speaking, listening only. After a moment his expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. "They've acknowledged," he said. The man in the suit closed his eyes briefly. "That was fast." The senior officer nodded. "They're requesting immediate containment." "Containment of what?" the man asked. "Everyone," the officer replied, "including us." The guard felt the implications land. Containment meant separation. It meant information silos. It meant no one moving freely until narratives were established. The child looked up at the raised voices. "What does that mean?" The guard crouched slightly. "It means things will be quiet for a bit." "I don't like quiet," she said. "I know," he replied. The man in the suit stepped aside, making space in the doorway. "We're moving her to a secure holding room." The guard didn't move. "She stays with me." "That's not." "She stays with me," the guard repeated evenly, "until oversight arrives." The man stared at him. The senior officer watched closely. "She's the reason this channel exists," the guard continued. "Separating now compromises that." Another pause, then the senior officer nodded once, agreed. The man's jaw tightened. He turned away, barking orders into his radio. "Prepare room C, no internal staff." The child slipped off the bench and stood beside the guard without being asked. She didn't touch him. She stood close enough to feel his presence. He adjusted his stance to match hers. As they moved into the corridor, the palace felt different. Quieter, but not calmer. Doors stood open where they shouldn't. Guards held positions they weren't assigned. Everyone was waiting for someone else to decide what this meant. They reached room C. The door opened inward. Plain, unadorned, safe in the way that nothing else was. Inside, the guard positioned himself instinctively, between the child and the door, eyes on the corridor beyond. Behind them, the door closed. Not locked. Outside, footsteps retreated. Somewhere far above, people who had never stood in this palace were being briefed. The guard looked down at the child. She looked up at him. "Will she be in trouble?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Outside the room, a phone rang. Once, then again. The phone stopped ringing. That unsettled the guard more than if it had been answered. Silence at that level usually meant alignment was happening somewhere else, quiet, decisive, irreversible. Room C had no windows, no decorative elements, just a table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, a wall-mounted camera with its indicator light off. The guard clocked that immediately. Observation without recording. Deliberate. He remained standing. The child sat on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands folded again in her lap. She had returned to the posture she used when adults were deciding things over her head. Footsteps approached. This time they did not stop outside the door. It opened. Ned. 2 figures entered, not security, not palace staff. Oversight. They wore the kind of clothing that carried authority without uniform, neutral colors, no insignia, no visible devices. 1 man, 1 woman, both calm, both already informed. The senior officer followed them in, then stopped just inside the door. He did not sit. The woman's gaze went first to the child, then to the guard. Assessment without judgment. That was new. "Thank you for waiting," she said. The guard nodded once. He did not thank her back. "We're here to establish facts," the man said, "not assign blame." The guard had heard that phrase before. It was rarely true, but it mattered that it was said in front of the child. The woman crouched slightly, lowering herself to the child's eye level. She didn't touch her. She didn't smile. "You're safe here," she said. "No one is in trouble for telling the truth." The child glanced at the guard. He nodded just once. "I want to ask you a few questions," the woman continued. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." The child considered this carefully. "I can stop." "Yes," the woman replied, "at any time." That answer mattered. The guard saw it land. The woman began gently. "Can you tell me what made you cry in the car?" The child's fingers tightened. She hesitated. The guard shifted his weight slightly, a reminder of presence, not pressure. "The door locked," the child said. "I didn't like that." "Did someone lock it?" the woman asked. "Yes." "Who?" The child's eyes dropped to the floor. "She did." No name, no accusation, just fact. The man scribbled a note. The senior officer's jaw tightened. The woman nodded calmly. "Has that happened before?" The child hesitated again, then nodded once. The room felt smaller. "Did anyone tell you not to talk about it?" the woman asked. The child looked up sharply. "She said it would make things complicated." The guard felt a cold weight settle fully in his chest. Complicated was a word used when harm needed disguising. The woman glanced briefly at the man. A look passed between them. No surprise, just confirmation. The man turned to the guard. "Thank you for invoking the channel." The guard didn't respond. Gratitude was premature. Outside the room, a door closed hard. Raised voices followed, then cut off abruptly. Containment was tightening. The woman straightened. "We're going to separate roles now," she said, "for clarity." She looked at the guard. "You'll remain with the child." Then at the senior officer. "You'll step outside." The officer hesitated, just a fraction, then nodded and left. The door closed again. The guard felt the pressure spike, not on him, but around him. This was the moment where institutions decided how much truth they could tolerate. The man checked his watch. "There will be consequences." The guard met his gaze. "For whom?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the door. Someone was approaching again. Faster this time. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. No hesitation, no attempt at discretion. The handle turned. The door opened hard enough to strike the wall limiter, the sound sharp in the small room. The woman from oversight didn't flinch. Neither did the man. They turned as one. Camilla entered. Her composure was intact, but it had hardened. The warmth she used selectively was gone now, replaced by something precise and unforgiving. Behind her stood 2 aides and a security officer who did not meet the guard's eyes. "This meeting is over," she said. The woman from oversight didn't rise. "It's just begun." Camilla's gaze snapped to her. "You've exceeded your remit." "We're operating under statutory authority," the man replied calmly, "triggered by a verified welfare concern." Camilla laughed once quietly. "Verified by whom?" The man didn't look at the guard. "By a child." Silence dropped into the room, dense and uncomfortable. Camilla turned toward the bench. "Charlotte, darling, come with me." The child did not move. She looked at the guard. He didn't step in front of her. He didn't speak. He simply remained where he was, an unmoving fact in the room. "I said come here," Camilla repeated, sharper now. The woman from oversight stood slowly. "She's not obligated to comply right now." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "You will not undermine my authority in my own residence." "This is not a residence matter," the woman replied. "It's a safeguarding matter." Camilla's jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." The man spoke quietly. "Then transparency will resolve it." Camilla turned on him. "You think this ends well?" "No," he said. "I think it ends correctly." The child's hands clenched in her lap. Her breathing quickened. The guard noticed immediately. He shifted his stance, subtly narrowing the space between them without touching her. "I don't want to go," the child said. The words were barely louder than breath, but they were clear. Camilla froze. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her. Then she straightened, smoothing an invisible crease in her sleeve. "You're confused," she said coolly. "You've been upset." "I was scared," the child replied. The guard felt something settle definitively. This was no longer ambiguous. The man from oversight closed his notebook. That's sufficient. Camilla's eyes flashed. You will regret this. The woman met her gaze steadily. That depends on who you mean by you. Camilla looked at the guard then, not with anger, with calculation. You've made yourself a problem. He inclined his head slightly. Yes. She turned on her heel and left the room without another word. Her aides followed. The door closed behind them, softer than before, but no less final. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then the woman from oversight exhaled slowly. We're initiating separation. The man nodded, effective immediately. The guard felt the meaning of those words settle like weight on his shoulders. What happens now? The child asked quietly. The guard looked down at her. He chose honesty without fear. Things will change. Am I staying? She asked. Yes, he said, you are. And you? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Outside the room, multiple radios activated at once. Voices layered over one another, controlled urgency, formal language, irreversible steps being taken. The man from oversight turned to the guard. You'll be reassigned pending review. The guard nodded. But the woman added, you'll remain available. The child looked up at him again, searching. He met her gaze. I'm not leaving. She nodded once, just once. Outside, the palace was already adjusting, doors closing, people being moved, authority being quietly redistributed. Containment was complete, and nothing would return to how it had been. The corridor outside room C emptied with unnatural efficiency. Not hurried, not chaotic, just gone, people reassigned, routes altered. The palace absorbed disruption the way it always did, by redistributing it until nothing visible remained. The guard stood just inside the doorway as oversight personnel exited one by one. The woman gave him a final look, not reassuring, not warning, observational, the kind reserved for people who had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The door closed. This time it was locked. Not against the child, against intrusion. The indicator light on the wall camera blinked on steady amber, recording now, formal, logged. The guard noted the time instinctively, though he no longer carried authority to act on it. The child sat quietly on the chair, feet still tucked beneath her. She watched the door for several seconds after it shut, then looked up at him. They're not shouting anymore, she said. No, he replied, they won't. Why? Because decisions are being made. She nodded as if she understood that more than she should. About me. Yes. Her fingers twisted together. Did I do something wrong? The question landed hard. He answered without delay. No. She studied his face carefully, searching for contradiction. Finding none, she exhaled slowly. Am I in trouble with her? He chose his words carefully. You're not responsible for how adults react. That seemed to satisfy her, though not fully. It never did. A chime sounded from the wall panel near the door. Not an alert, a status change. The guard turned slightly to see it. Reassignment confirmed. No location, no duration, just acknowledgement. The system had removed him without ceremony. He felt it then, not anger, not fear, but the quiet severing that came when identity shifted without consent. His uniform still fit, his posture was still correct, but his authority had been withdrawn cleanly, like a blade removed from a sheath. The child noticed the change in him immediately. You're different, she said. He looked down, only on paper. She considered that. Paper matters here. Yes, he agreed, it does. Footsteps approached outside the door, single, measured. The lock disengaged briefly, then held. A voice spoke through the panel. You'll be escorted shortly, the voice said. Neutral, unfamiliar. Understood, the guard replied. The child's shoulders tensed. Are you leaving? He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level without kneeling. I may be moved. From here? Yes. Her hands clenched. I don't want to be alone. You won't be, he said immediately. But you won't be here. He paused. That mattered. No, he said honestly, but I'll still be near. She studied him, eyes searching. You promise? He didn't say promise. He chose something firmer. I will remain available, he said. That seemed to mean something to her. She nodded once. The door unlocked fully this time. 2 guards stood outside, not from his unit. Their posture was correct, their expressions neutral. They did not look at the child. Time, one of them said. The guard straightened slowly. Every movement felt observed now, recorded, interpreted. He took 1 step toward the door, then stopped. He turned back to the child. You did the right thing, he said. She looked down at her hands. It didn't feel brave. It rarely does, he replied. The guard stepped into the corridor. The door closed behind him. And somewhere far below the palace, the gate completed its cycle, metal meeting stone, sound muted by distance. Once closed, it did not reopen easily. The escort did not rush him. That more than anything confirmed his reassignment carried instruction. Be seen but not heard. The corridor lights were dimmed a fraction below normal, an energy-saving measure on paper. In practice, it softened faces, reduced detail, discouraged recognition. They passed 2 intersections without turning. The guard noted each one anyway. Habit did not switch off just because authority had. A door opened ahead, administrative, not ceremonial. No crest, no guard posted, the kind of room used to remove people quietly. Inside, a single desk, a chair opposite it, a terminal with its screen dark. The escort stepped aside. Sit, one of them said. He did. The door closed, not locked, it didn't need to be. Moments passed, then longer ones. He kept his posture exact, hands resting on his thighs, eyes level. The room was cool, the air recycled too frequently, designed to keep people awake. The screen blinked on. A face appeared, not live, recorded, a neutral delivery stripped of inflection. Pending review, you are relieved of active protective duty, the voice said. You are not accused of misconduct at this time. At this time, you are instructed not to discuss the events of today with any party, not explicitly authorized. He listened without reacting. You will remain on site until further notice. The screen went dark. Silence returned. Minutes later, another door opened, different cadence, different weight. The man from oversight entered alone this time, jacket back on, expression tired. They're moving quickly, he said, sitting without invitation. Faster than I expected. Good, the guard replied. The man studied him. You understand what they'll try to do? Yes. They'll isolate the incident, frame it as misinterpretation. Yes. They'll say you acted with good intent but poor judgment. The guard nodded once. That's generous. The man allowed himself a thin smile. It's survivable. The guard met his gaze. What about her? The smile faded. She's been reassigned caregivers, temporary. Locked doors, the guard asked. The man shook his head. No. The guard exhaled slowly. She asked for you, the man added. The guard's jaw tightened. He said nothing. She was told you're nearby, the man continued. That you're available. The guard nodded. That may change, the man said, depending on how this goes. Then it won't be quiet, the guard replied. The man stood. No, it won't. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, you forced daylight into a room that prefers dusk. The guard didn't respond. When the man left, the room felt smaller. The absence of dialogue sharpened every sound. The the hum of ventilation, distant footfalls, a door closing somewhere far away. Hours passed, or minutes, time blurred without markers. Then a chime. Not from the wall, from the guard's radio. He looked down. The device had been reactivated, restricted channel only. A single message scrolled across the display. Stand by, do not move. He remained seated. Another message followed. Subject requested visual confirmation. His breath caught just slightly. He stood. The door opened immediately, as if timed to his movement. A different escort this time, faster, purposeful. They did not speak. They stopped outside a glass partition overlooking an internal courtyard. Evening light pooled on stone, controlled, gentle. On the far side, the child stood with an aide. She was holding something now, a small object he hadn't seen before. A toy, new, too new. She looked up, saw him, did not smile, but she nodded. Once, the aide leaned down, spoke softly. The child hesitated, then raised her hand. The guard raised his in return. The glass between them reflected both figures faintly, separate, aligned, held apart by design. The escort touched his elbow, that's all. He lowered his hand. As they turned away, the guard understood what the gate had really closed. Not a path out. A line between what would be remembered and what would be buried. And he knew with certainty that this story was not finished.